Good morning. It's an honor to be here. I want to thank President Trump and Senior Advisor Ivanka Trump for their leadership and steadfast commitment to the fight against human trafficking. The scourge of human trafficking is a stain on all of humanity. It invades borders, destroys communities, and robs millions of their human dignity. Faced with this great challenge, the Trump administration is committed to protecting survivors, prosecuting offenders, and ending modern-day slavery. However, governments cannot act alone. Human trafficking is a global crisis and requires global solutions across all sectors of society. Partnerships with faith-based organizations are critical in turning the tide. Faith-based organizations serve as lifelines for some of the most vulnerable people on the planet, including victims of human trafficking. They have an unrivaled ability to build trust with survivors and to provide care and rehabilitation. Like the United States, the Holy See understands and appreciates the powerful role of faith-based organizations in eradicating modern-day slavery. Indeed, Catholic organizations are among some of America's best partners in this endeavor. The U.S. Embassy to the Holy See works with the global network of the Catholic Church, which extends to more than 1.3 billion people worldwide. For example, as an embassy, we promote and support the courageous work of Catholic sisters. Our grants have funded anti-trafficking programs for women religious in 36 countries. Recently, we established an anti-trafficking training course for a global organization called Talitha Kum. Talitha Kum is comprised of over 2,000 Catholic sisters in 92 countries, all working to combat human trafficking. Faith-based organizations like Talitha Kum are on the ground in nearly every country in the world, including the United States. They work tirelessly to save women, men, and children from horrific fates. And they are key partners for federal and state law enforcement agencies, braving the omnipresent threat of criminal and terrorist organizations that profit from this global crime. Together, law enforcement agencies and faith-based organizations help facilitate victim recovery, reintegration, and criminal prosecution. Here in the United States, the Department of Homeland Security and the FBI have strong partnerships with Catholic service organizations to provide safe havens for victims. And internationally, the United States and the Holy See are members of the Santa Marta Group, an organization comprised of law enforcement officials, Catholic bishops, women religious, and civil society leaders that work together to develop victim-centered approaches to end human trafficking. As you leave today with renewed dedication and resolve, I encourage you to explore opportunities to collaborate with faith-based organizations across all faiths in the fight against modern-day slavery. In this regard, the U.S. Embassy to the Holy See will continue to work diligently with the Vatican to eradicate human trafficking. Together, we can save lives and end this horrific injustice. Thank you.
Please welcome to the stage the panelists for our second panel, moderated by Ambassador at Large, Office to Monitor and Combat Trafficking in Persons, John Richmond.
Well, this morning we do have the incredible privilege of hearing from several members of Congress, leaders who have helped create the massive shift in the legal landscape around the world, establishing a comprehensive trafficking in persons law, our Trafficking Victims Protection Act, the 20th anniversary of which is this year, which is what is bringing us all together. It defined human trafficking to include both labor trafficking as well as sex trafficking. It includes trafficking offenses against children and adults. It makes sure that we're thinking about both domestic and international trafficking, and dispels some common myths, like the idea that trafficking involves the movement of people. It doesn't require the movement. It just requires coercion. This is a crime that there's something we can do about. I'm grateful that the law gave us the 3P paradigm that we still use today, this idea of prosecution, protection, and prevention. Three inextricably important and mutually reinforcing ideas that help us in this fight. So with this incredible panel, let me start with Congressman Smith. Congressman, you were one of the earliest champions of the bill, and you introduced the bill that ultimately became the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. I'd love for you to tell us what was going on in the late 90s. What prompted you to be an early champion of this work? And how has the Trafficking in Persons report that was created and mandated by the law that you helped champion making an impact around the world?
Mr. Ambassador, thank you so very much, and thank you for so faithfully implementing the law and doing above and beyond what was even articulated in the statute and statutes that followed. You know, I've been in Congress now 40 years, and in 1982, I introduced my first anti-trafficking resolution targeted at the Soviet Union. The use of gulag labor there was horrific. Commissioner Von Raab, who was then the Customs Commissioner, had a number of products that he wanted to put an import ban on. So I did a resolution that passed in the House. A few years later, Frank Wolf and I went to Perm Camp 35, the infamous gulag where such great people like Natan Sharansky had spent so many years of their life. But again, the gulag system was all over the Soviet Union, and exporting of those products was occurring. A couple years later, after Tiananmen Square, Frank Wolf and I again went to a prison camp in China and saw 40 Tiananmen Square activists under the false banner of reform through labor, forced labor, making goods that came to our markets, including jelly shoes, which were very popular then, socks. We came back with samples, got an import ban on that. A couple of years later, in 1996, I introduced comprehensive legislation on child labor. And unfortunately, it had the same template that we put into the TPVA, and that is name names and then sanction those countries that either do not enforce the law or if they don't have a law at all on child labor. I had Kathy Lee Gifford testify at one of the hearings. She had products in Central America that were, unfortunately, the result of child labor being sold in our stores. Next, 2 years later, we got the bill passed in the House, failed in the Senate, never took it up. Great people like Michael Horowitz came into my office. We had great meetings. What an advocate he is and was for human trafficking. My staffers, David Abramowitz on the Democrat side, and Joseph Reese, who was our first ambassador to East Timor. We worked on legislation to finally say, enough. We're going to combat trafficking here, overseas. We will also make it a whole of government, so nobody is excluded in the government, and have real penalties up to life imprisonment for anybody who exploits a child, and anybody through force, fraud, or coercion hurts a woman or a man. But sex trafficking is obviously one of the major focuses. As Kalitza said so well, you know, there are about 5 million women, and mostly women and children, who are sex trafficked, about 20 million, according to the ILO, who are trafficked because of labor. And, of course, there's an intermingling so very often. But the legislation was very hard to get passed. The previous administration then did not want the TIP report, which you do great work in putting together so that the 3 Ps, the narrative on each and every country, says how they're doing on prevention, prosecution, and protection, with a set of recommendations that follow as well. They said, just put it into the human rights report, the country reports on human rights practices, which would have been a step. We said, absolutely not. My friend over here, Sam Brownback, took the bill up on the Senate side, his own bill, and we did a merge purge at the end. But it was against serious odds. That administration did not want to have sanctions. Sanctions are embedded in the bill, as you know so well. It covers everything, and it's making a difference. There were times when the TIP report was less than stellar, 2015 in particular, but you have done a magnificent job. It is the gold standard, and I know for a fact, because you do as well, we meet with delegations all the time. They don't want to be on Tier 3. They don't want to be shamed for their egregious complicity in human trafficking, sex or labor, and they want to be above that. Plus, there's the sanctions piece. So I want to thank you again for what you have done. There's so much more to be done. Finally, government to NGOs, and the NGOs have been indispensable in all of this. Secretary, or I should say Ambassador Gingrich, thank you for the faith-based emphasis you have made, because that, I think, is indispensable to ending this terrible plague. And we've had Delta Airlines testify at hearings. They're doing a tremendous job. But the private partnership now, just yesterday, Deb, who was here, she did a tremendous work, it is doing a tremendous work, as is Homeland Security, on training people to be situationally aware. R.W. Barnabas and Hackensack Meridian, two large networks in my state, are training their healthcare workers. And we know from the 2014 Laura Lederer study, and I'll finish on this, they've made it very clear that 90% of all the victims of sex trafficking go to a healthcare facility. 63% go to an emergency room. So if you have healthcare professionals who are situationally aware, and we need to share this as you are with overseas partners as well, there is a point of contact for victim identification, God willing, intervention, and then on to the road to recovery. So thank you.
Thank you for your passion about this. Thank you for using the TIP report in your engagement and with other countries. I hear, as I travel, other countries talking about the importance when members of Congress raise this on their congressional outreach to other countries, so I'm grateful for that. And you might be encouraged to know there are original members of the Trafficking in Persons Office here today that opened the office when it first started based on the Act. And as you mentioned, I know that you had allies in the Senate. And Ambassador Brownback, you are certainly one of those as you brought this bill forward on the Senate side. And now I get to work alongside you at the State Department in your new role as Ambassador at Large for Religious Freedom. And I'm grateful for your wise counsel during my time at the State Department. I've certainly benefited from working with you. But I'd love to know what motivated you, and what were your thoughts as you began to think about the Trafficking in Persons Act from the Senate perspective? How have you seen it be used? What are we doing well, and what do we need to do differently? How do we need to adjust as we're moving into the future?
Well, I saw something and then decided you need to do something, which my guess is my story is pretty similar to most people in this room. You see it, something clicks, and you say, well, somebody needs to do something, and then you turn back and you look at yourself, well, I need to do something. And did it. Gary Haugen showed up at my office when he was heading the IJM, which I believe he still is. I don't know if Gary's here or not. And he laid a lock on my coffee table. And he said this was taken off of a brothel in India, off of a room where a 12-year-old girl was locked in here, and then the lock was taken off when a customer would come, and she was locked in there at night. And this continues to go on, and it goes on a great deal. I had a great staff member, Sharon Pate, at the time that was really working this issue, and we formed a partnership with Paul Wellstone, who he and Sheila, his wife, were both involved in this, and they were seeing women being trafficked from the Ukraine into Minnesota. And they were showing up then at battered women's shelters and saying, what are you doing here from the Ukraine? Well, it's kind of a long story, but let me tell you about it. And did. And together we formed a partnership. And behind and on that partnership also, the private sector was, we had Gloria Steinem on that, Chuck Colson. And we would go around to other members in the Senate and say, we've got Gloria Steinem and Chuck Colson on this bill, and Paul Wellstone and I are doing this. And they'd say, just sign me up, I don't care what's in it. If you guys agree on this, we'll go forward. But that's really the point of it. This is an issue that just knows no political boundary. This is a complete human dignity issue about somebody that's just been put in a horrific circumstance and condition. And being from the state of Kansas, and I have my Kansas City Chiefs socks on, my mother grew up on the property where John Brown would stay when he was in Kansas during the Bleeding Kansas. We're fighting against slavery in those very early days. And I'm looking at that heritage and saying, I've got to be a part to end this modern slavery, just like you've said that to yourself.
Well, I'm certainly grateful, and I appreciate you highlighting the bipartisan nature of this bill as it's gone through. And as one thing we've seen over the last 20 years is that there has been a grand consensus across the political aisle regarding this important issue. I'm grateful that the two of you put together this law, this comprehensive law that focuses on both labor and sex trafficking, gave us great tools about how we could approach nonviolent coercion to address how traffickers are actually operating in modern times, and give us great tools like the T-Visa and other tools that we can use to make sure that victims are protected. Let me shift to Congressman McCall. You have served as the chairman of the House Homeland Security Committee. Now you're the lead Republican on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. You're working both domestically as well as internationally on this. I know you've just proposed a new piece of legislation, the Leveraging Information for Foreign Traffickers Act, the LIFT Act, I think it's being called. We'd love to hear more about that and how you see the role of the U.S. Advisory Council and survivors that are here today, but also survivors around the country and around the world, and how they speak into this issue. What needs to be done as we look into the future?
Well, thank you, Ambassador, and thanks for having me, and thanks for your service, and Ambassador, and Congressman Ted Poe, who was on Foreign Affairs, did so much on trafficking issues. It's good to see you again. I think my journey started, I was a federal prosecutor for about 10 years, and then Cornyn's Deputy Attorney General, we started the Internet Crimes Against Children unit to catch predators online. And there have been thousands of prosecutions in my state putting these predators behind bars. And that's a real positive thing. That was back in 2002, but since I became chairman, when I was chairman of Homeland, we had the Blue campaign in the Department of Homeland Security. I see some out in the audience. We authorized that into law to raise public awareness on the issue, because what we found is that most people in the country were not even aware this was happening. And it happens not just in Thailand. It's happening in our own backyard. And I want to recognize Courtney Litvak, my human trafficking survivor, who came back to us a year ago, who has a special place in my heart and a special story to tell, because you have to hear these stories. This happened outside of Houston, Texas, and suburbs of Houston and Katy, Texas. If it can happen in Katy, Texas, it can happen anywhere in the nation. And so the Blue campaign has done a great job coordinating with law enforcement, public awareness. The other bill is the interdiction for the protection of children, which takes my DPS, my Texas DPS model, where a lot of these troopers make the traffic stops. But if they don't know how to identify the warning signs that, hey, this is not this girl's father, or something's in that car that doesn't really make sense. And they have a training program that we want to take nationwide with a grant funding component to it, so that we can capture and arrest these evil monsters, and get them off the streets. Finally, the LIFT Act, leveraging information on foreign trafficking. Believe it or not, in our embassies and our consulate offices, when they deny a visa for based on human trafficking, they do not share that information with law enforcement. It's just tucked away in a file. So this would mandate that information be shared with law enforcement. But what I'm also proud, and this goes back to now the council, is we authorize the President's Advisory Council to the year 2025. Why is that important? Because I think I want to give Ivanka a shout out as well. She's really elevated this issue and prioritized this issue. We want to do a lot. We want to make this council really mean something, not only for the executive branch, but for policymakers in the Congress, so we can get the advice And I've learned so much from just Courtney about the process and how it works. How could a beautiful 17-year-old girl get swept up, and I can't say where because there's an ongoing investigation, but how could this have happened? It really makes no sense. And to get these stories and have victims and survivors on the council, I think is very valuable to Congress and to the executive branch. As we approach the Super Bowl, I know you're going to that, you know that's going to be a major trafficking event. And there are going to be groomers all around the Super Bowl trying to trap young men and women into this horrific modern-day slavery. And we all know the stories, and you're bought and sold like property. This needs to stop. And as a former prosecutor, I try to educate prosecutors and judges, too. You know what? The victims are the victims. They don't deserve to be behind bars. It's the predators. It's the people taking the hit. And they need to be behind bars for a very, very long time.
No, I so appreciate you highlighting both the role of the Advisory Council and the fact that you're trying to extend its life in the LIFT Act. The council has been so valuable to me personally, and I think it's been valuable to the administration as well. And I also hope that, that folks hear the message that you're saying about the principle of non-prosecution of victims, that victims should not be prosecuted or penalized in any way for the unlawful acts their traffickers make them engage in. I think that's a really important point. Let me shift to Congresswoman Wagner. During your time in Congress, you've been incredibly focused on online exploitation of women and children as well as men. I know that you're personally interested in some of the work in the Philippines. I know the State Department has a robust child protection compact with the Philippines, where the Philippines puts skin in the game along with our foreign assistance, where we work together in order to actually stop traffickers and protect victims. Love to hear your perspective on what is going well and what needs to change as we move forward.
Great. Thank you, Ambassador Richmond. I'm going to stand up. I've got a long flight ahead of me and stretch my legs for a minute. But and I want to see all the survivors, all the NGOs, all the advocacy groups that just lift us up. To be here on the 20th anniversary of TVPA, Chris Smith, my ranking member, Mike Call and Ted Poe, I stand on your shoulders. This is only my 8th year in Congress, not 40th, 8th year in Congress. And the TVPA is so important. I got really passionate about human trafficking and labor trafficking that was going on, sex trafficking and labor trafficking, during my very first TIP report as a U.S. ambassador in Western Europe. And I was watching women and children and young boys being brought in from Eastern Europe and being exploited in Western Europe in horrific ways. And served my time and went back to the United States of America and began to dig into this in my own backyard, in my own country, and found that, yes, indeed, that human trafficking, and specifically sex trafficking, was hiding in plain sight in every community, in every faith organization, in every cul-de-sac, in every school district, all across our country, and that it was a scourge and something that we absolutely had to do something about. I tell you what you all are doing with the TIP report in terms of the compact is fantastic in the Philippines and online. It's been expanded, I know, to Peru and Ghana, Jamaica. I want to see it grow, so more and more. But my passion is to go after those predators online. I'm probably best known for the authorship and the passing of FOSTA, the Fight Online Sex Trafficking Act. Yes! You all know, you were there. They said it couldn't be done, and we did it. It was a life's work. I have to say, it truly is. To be able to give tools and resources to our law enforcement and prosecutors that allow them to go through the sex trafficking statutes and the prostitution statutes to fight this criminal enterprise. It allows justice for our victims at last, and it did something they said could never be done, which was to go in, and Congressman Poe knows, to go in and amend the Communications Decency Act, Section 230, to make Congress's intent very, very clear. We never meant through the CDA to make the internet an red light district. If it is a crime offline, it is a crime online. Period. Full stop. So we have, it's been now, gosh, President Trump, and with the help of Ivanka and so many others, the president signed this into law in April of 2018. So it's been about a year and a half, and the disruption has been amazing in a good way. We brought down Backpage.com with a 93-count indictment. Over 60% of, many just pulled down their internet sites as a deterrent factor, which is what we knew it would do, for fear of prosecution. But we've disrupted over 60% year to year. A lot of what's being posted right now are kind of duplicates and spam and scam type of things. But you can go to childsafe.ai to see some of the inroads that we've made over this time period here. So I'm excited about that work and what you all did to make that happen. And my next crusade is end-to-end encryption. And I know the Attorney General talked about it, yes. And we talked about it, Ambassador, at our DHS conference. You know, I had, and I'm just going to call it out because, as Kevin and others know, I just do. And I had the opportunity at a hearing in financial services to speak and question Mr. Zuckerberg, Facebook. 90% of the online sexual, pornographic, horrific, exploitive images are on Facebook and their platforms. 12 million, in fact, in 2018. And to say something positive, at the time, they reported those 12 million. They reported those 12 million horrific, awful images. But now they're going to move to end-to-end encryption. And when they do that, law enforcement will not be able to access any of those images. And with impunity, after letters and pleadings from the Attorney General, from the Department of Homeland Security, from law enforcement, from prosecutors, from DAs, from me, Congress, others, they refuse. They want to go move forward on their end-to-end encryption. So if an industry won't police itself, that's when Congress steps in. And we're going to police them, that's for sure. You know, and this is important, privacy and lawful access are not pitted against each other. Privacy and lawful access are not pitted against each other. The Fourth Amendment gives us a lot of broad privacy rights, but you know what, it's not warrantless, all right? And we have to have a way to make sure that people's privacy is protected, but that also law enforcement has a way to keep our children, our women, the most vulnerable in our society, safe. That's what we're going to do with this legislation. So that's where we're going next. I thank you for the time. I thank you all for what you do. We all stand on your shoulders and are grateful for the advocacy group work. My great staffer, Rachel Wagley, back there, about ready to give birth any minute now. She helps author so much of what goes on here. I'm just grateful to you. I'm grateful to our State Department and for the TIP report. And what you're doing online now with the Compact is really great, and I want to see it expanded. So I thank you.
Thank you. Well, I can't tell you how much a treat it is for me to actually reverse roles. I'm used to getting asked questions by members of Congress, and now I get to actually ask you all, so it's a treat for me. I can tell you that a lot has been accomplished on the Hill, and we're grateful for the legislation that's been provided. Shortly after the Trafficking Victims Act became law in 2000, the United Nations passed its protocol against trafficking in persons. And I'm grateful today that the head of the United Nations Trafficking in Persons program is actually here with us. Grateful for your partnership over the years and look forward to continuing to combat this with you. It's one of the most widely adopted international protocols. There's over 175 countries that have signed up. There's only about 15 to 18 countries that haven't, which is just remarkable. And since then, we've had over 150 governments around the world have followed the United States and passed trafficking in persons laws, comprehensive laws. And we're so grateful for that, to have this international legal consensus that human trafficking is wrong, that it's a violation, that people are putting freedom first, which is the phrase that the president has given to this year, that we want to put freedom first. We want to put it first in our priorities and our conversations. We want to raise it with other countries. We want to raise it with each state in this union and make sure we're doing well. Because while we recognize it's the 20th anniversary and we want to celebrate what's been accomplished, we also know that there is a great deal left to be done. And the 24.9 million victims around the world are evidence of that. It is our job now to take the parchment promises of law and turn them into tangible deeds that bring hope to individuals who need rescue and need services. And we want to make sure that we do that. And we want to make sure that we hold traffickers accountable, that we end the impunity that traffickers currently enjoy. I can tell you that this is hard work. There are not easy answers. They're not simple solutions. But the world is not in desperate need of more people to explain to us why these things are hard. The world's in desperate need of more people to do the hard things. And I'm grateful that you all are here and willing to do those hard things, to secure freedom for individuals who are currently being trafficked, and to put freedom first. We're grateful to this administration's focus on freedom first. Thankful that we get to work together with this White House, with Congress, with so many civil society leaders. I see so many NGOs and leaders here from across the movement. We're grateful for your presence here today. And we're grateful that as you leave here, you're going to receive a commemorative book of the last 20 years that highlights the history of what has gone on here in the United States, how the act was formed, early stories from Congressman Smith and Ambassador Brownback about their days along with their colleagues from both sides of the aisle. It's a retrospective of what has been accomplished and really a call to each of us that as we pivot into the future, we have to do more. That what we've accomplished so far is not sufficient. There is more to be done, and I'm grateful that we get to be in this fight together. So thank you all.
Thank you.